would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, yes. So I'm a GP vet with 30 years experience, and desperate to talk about live feeding, raw feeding.
So firstly, Ariel, what is a GP vet? Because I know that you've got a lot of experience. I just thought I'd ask now. So what's your experience?
Yes, so GP vet is as you would have a GP doctor. So you get people who are surgeons, you get people who are anaesthetists, but I've chosen to just be one-on-one with clients in a consulting room, talking to them about their pets. I'm not the one in the back operating on your dog or doing procedures. My experience comes from talking to owners, and it's through this experience that I absolutely love this, because I have it myself, this human animal bond that we have with our pets, which is so incredibly strong. So it comes across massively with feeding our pets. In the consulting room, when you ask a client so I love talking to clients. I love learning from owners. I've learned from owners over the years, so many different owners. I've worked in charity sector and I've worked in large private veterinary hospitals. And the amount that I've learned from owners is just massive. But the most difficult question you can ask an owner, which is the most important question that every single vet and every single doctor needs to ask their patient, is what do you feed your dog or your cat? And you can just physically see the person squirm in front of you. They look away, they don't want to answer, they forget the name of the food. If they raw feed, they are very, very abrupt with you because they so feel they're going to be judged by you. But to me, that comes across as they have their reservations. They aren't quite sure themselves. Are they doing the right thing? And they're very worried about being criticized. So yes, feeding to me is one of the most emotional topics that you can broach, that you can talk about, and that you can experience as a vet.
So I think it's just worth kind of, you seem to know, and I know you know a lot about nutrition, and as a vet, I think that's really unique, isn't it?
It is, and it's exactly that, Holly, is I've watched owners struggle with how to feed their pets properly, and I've had so many seriously overweight pets that 3 years ago, 4 years ago now, actually, it drove me to the point of wanting to do more to help, because we don't have a lot of training as vets in the nutrition field, very, very little. And even modern day, even vets who are coming out of vet school now are still, and doctors the same, maybe 5 or 6 lectures covering the basics that you're going to forget, because you then just rely on the big corporate companies to provide the food. So this wasn't good enough for me. I felt I couldn't help owners. So I threw myself, and I couldn't help owners with severely overweight pets. And I desperately wanted to run slimming pet clubs in the UK to help owners. So I thought the only way I can do that is to actually do every veterinary nutrition course going. So thankfully it was pre-pandemic. I went to courses. I was able to go to courses. I was able to ask questions. I was able to travel. I traveled to Solihull in Birmingham, to one of the top practices there, to do what's called CPD. I did online courses run by the top vet nutritionists in the UK. And one course I even did twice. I found it so fascinating. I even did it twice. I just thought, I've got to cement this in my brain. Obviously, raw feeding was an enormously important topic that she covered in this course. And so yes, my understanding of nutrition and listening to owners, and I've just continued with that. I find the whole realm of nutrition absolutely fascinating. It's like, I wish I'd done this years and years ago, because it's like opening a crystal ball. You just suddenly, you understand conditions, you understand everything in a pet's health. So
it's fascinating. Well, let's dig down a bit deeper then. So let's kind of step back and think, well, what is raw feeding? Because I don't think I actually know exactly what raw feeding is.
I know, exactly. Such a good question. So raw feeding is an owner's choice to feed their dogs raw food, but raw meat. So they're choosing a meat, which it used to be called BAF, which stood for bones and raw feeding. Then they changed that to biologically appropriate raw feeding, which I'm going to explain later. It really isn't biologically appropriate, but and now it's just called raw feeding. Now it's just coined raw feeding. So an owner chooses to not feed a commercial diet, which would be tinned food or dry food. They're choosing to either buy, you do get, there's hundreds of companies now that are available in the UK. They either buy the raw meat packaged, and it normally is about 80% protein. We've got about 10% bones in there, and we've probably got about, I mean, as I say, it's not something, it's only, these are things that I've learned. It's not something I've ever advised to an owner at all. So I might be talking out of turn, but, and then we have 10% where there's going to be some vegetables or some grains in there. So it's an extremely high protein diet formed, and you don't cook the meat. So you're feeding a wide variety. I think they're always advised to feed as much variety as possible, whether it's duck, chicken, deer, beef, and a wide variety of the offal as well, of the different types of meats that you get in an animal.
So, I mean, I've seen the packeted stuff, you know, in the fridges and the freezers. Is that just raw meat, and then people have to add extra stuff to it to make it complete? Or the whole concept just kind of scares me, really.
Me too.
You know,
me too. It terrifies me, and as I say, I'll explain later why it terrifies me. But yes, so you've got pet stores now. Most pet stores, even the big ones, the big retail stores in the UK, they'll have freezers. And inside those freezers, you've got packets, never in sustainable packaging. It's always plastic, always plastic with meat, which is just horrendous for our oceans, our future environment. And obviously a lot of electricity needed to run these enormous freezers that you get in the pet stores, but yes, so it'll always come sealed. They have to vacuum seal them, obviously try to remove as much of so that it has a longer shelf life, basically. But the companies, and there are companies out there that say that they are balanced, they cover what FEDIAF says. They've got enough vitamin D3, they've got enough protein, they've got enough this, and owners can just buy a ready-made meal, and then they have to have their own freezer at home to keep it in, and that's what they do to feed their pets. Yes.
Okay. So where did it start, and I suppose why has it become so popular?
Yeah, so it started actually in America in 2007. There was an outbreak of deaths. 14 pets died in America in 2007, and it was found to be due to melamine. They found melamine in the dog food. And this was in dry food that had come from China. So they imported food from China to America, and the Chinese had tried to cut corners and make things cheaper, and they'd actually put melamine, which is a toxin in dogs and cats, and animals died. So suddenly people were very aware that, oh my goodness, is commercial food extremely dangerous? And then you suddenly had very vocal people that took to YouTube, took to TED Talks, took to social media, who started to talk and say that actually to feed a commercial diet is extremely dangerous. You've got to feed a raw diet, and then you have complete control. And you mustn't cook it, because if you cook it, then you're losing the nutrients. You get something called a Maillard reaction, which makes the proteins dangerous. But they were saying that cancers and commercial diets were causing cancers. They were causing all these problems, causing the deaths. So you must start to feed raw diets. Why it then carried on in the US, huge. It's now worldwide, sadly. There is also one vet who's in Australia who actually has advocated for it for years, even prior to 2007. He's always advocated for it for some unknown reason. But the reason why it's become so popular is because it's a massive, massive income for the companies who sell the raw food, but a massive income. When you consider that the meat industry is so heavily subsidized by the government that meat is actually really, really cheap to buy. And pigs, for example, pork and all livestock animals are extremely cheap to buy. The raw companies and the meat-based dog food companies justify it by saying it's all right because we're using the byproducts of the animal industry, so it's the best form of recycling. But because it's bought by the large pet food companies, it's then monetized. So suddenly you've got a value on an animal's byproducts. And it's extremely cheap for these companies to buy all of this byproduct, all of this, the offal basically that comes from the slaughterhouse. So these companies make an absolute fortune. They make so much money that they've been, the smaller companies who started have now been bought out by huge companies floating on the stock exchange. So it's an enormous, so obviously with that huge income comes an enormous marketing ability. I watched raw food being advertised on TV the other night. I was quite horrified. I thought, my goodness, no. It's just wrong. It came straight after the flea product advertisement, and
goodness. All I'm seeing on all of these ads is dogs are wolves. Dogs are wolves.
Yes. Okay.
And I mean, we'll go into this, but that's the kind of, everyone goes, oh yes, I suppose dogs are wolves. And I think personally that's why there's this development of oh yes, actually, yes, raw meats, just as wolves would. And I think you're probably going to go into why that's not necessarily.
And you're so right. That's exactly what these enormous companies have used as their marketing. Is they've said to owners, your dog needs an ancestral diet. It is a wolf, and it needs to eat raw meat. But the saddest thing is how everybody's had the wool pulled over their eyes, because dogs, yes, and in their initial ancestors were they were wolves as ancestors that branched off in thousands and thousands of years ago. But we also had other animals branching off. So we had animals like the maned wolf that lives in South America, that is actually completely vegetarian. They eat wolf apples, and they resemble a dog even more than a wolf. They forage. They teach their pups to forage. They have the same gestation as our dogs. And then branching off, we have something like the aardwolf as well that would branch off from the wolf. Now, the aardwolf is a gorgeous little animal. They live in Africa. They're extremely shy. They're nocturnal, and they live purely off termites. And they look just like miniature hyenas. They're tiny and spiky. They're the funniest looking little things. So they've branched off. Then we have the brown hyena, which lives in Africa, which does resemble a husky. It's got the same jaw formation. They actually source out truffles as part of their protein source, which is a type of fungus, because as well they're nocturnal. They're not hunters, and so these all belong to the order Carnivora, which is the same order that panda bears belong to. So they're all fall under panda bears that don't eat bamboos. So these all fall under the banner of Carnivora. But dogs are actually omnivores. They definitely are not carnivores, which is what these companies like to make out. The dogs are carnivores, they need meat. But what's happened is dogs were domesticated to 20 to 40,000 years ago. And the very first dogs that were domesticated they probably had wolf-like characteristics. They became friendlier towards humans. They were the ones that started to hang around the humans who were protecting their crops, and so they started to eat and scavenge off whatever the humans were eating. Stone Age man was known to be, and Stone Age dogs, I've actually written an article about this, were mainly vegetarian. They were fed very, very little meat. So over these 40,000 years, we've had changes in the whole genome, the whole DNA of a dog system, because they've had to adapt to living alongside humans and just being fed off scraps and not having this high meat diet that wolves would have had. And a wolf will only hunt and maybe catch a prey once a week, for example. So actually, they're not eating meat every single day.
It's evolution, isn't it?
It's evolution, absolutely. And
it's
so
as simple as evolution.
It's as simple as evolution.
Hello.
We all evolve. And so we've actually got published proof that dogs have genomes or DNA that's completely different to wolves in their digestion. Yes, and they can actually digest starches, which wolves can't, but dogs can. So that whole ancestry bit is a whole marketing ploy.
Do you know what? This is just so fascinating, Dr. Ariel. But I think what we need to be asking though is this is what I'm really dying to know is a raw diet good for dogs?
No. Absolutely not. Okay, so I'm going to talk as a vet here, and I'm going to talk with my experience of the cases I've seen that have worried me. So these are the diseases that you see with dogs on an extremely high protein diet, which is what a raw diet is: high meat, high protein. Raw food carries an enormous, every slaughterhouse is, and when meat is packaged to be sent for human consumption, every meat packet will have someone checking the whole health and safety of the meat. And all meat, chickens and everything, they're allowed a certain level of bacteria. But that assumes obviously that humans are going to cook the food. And then the bacteria load goes. But when we have the packaged byproducts, which would be the heart, the liver, the stomach, which is tripe, even down to the hooves and pig's ears, for example, these are chews. These are sold in pet stores, and they are also raw food because they are not treated. They are full of bacteria. And the course that I did, the vet nutritionist said she will not even touch pig's ears or horse hooves, or you get the cow pizzle, it's called, which is horrible. But they are so full of bacteria that you actually shouldn't even touch those treats. But they are sold in pet stores. They're on the same level. Children could touch them. Huge health hazard. But the risk of bacteria on the food is the biggest concern, the biggest one, because the once that food goes into your freezer, freezing it doesn't kill the bacteria, and it has to obviously be defrosted for your dog to eat it. And the defrosting process, and once it's back to normal temperature, it is full of E. coli, Salmonella, Campylobacter, Listeriosis. The levels are right up there, and these are bacteria that we try so hard this is why we wash our apples before we eat them, and we wash our cucumbers before we eat them, because we're worried about levels of these bacteria. But in raw food, these levels are extremely high. So what it's doing is it provides an abnormal bacterial overload in dogs. So that's the first problem that we see in dogs: vomiting and diarrhea. Huge amount of vomiting and diarrhea. In fact, there's been a nationwide vomiting outbreak in the UK since January.
Oh yes,
there
has been a very spooky vomiting outbreak.
Exactly, and now in January it started. In February there was an article that I don't know why didn't make national headlines like all the rest of the articles. There was a recall from a factory in Doncaster that makes raw food, and 5 of their batches were found to contain Salmonella. They had an expiry date of August, but they were saying any dogs. So dogs are naturally going to sniff each other's bums, they're going to sniff the saliva, they're going to play, they go to doggy daycare centers, they share in the saliva. So even if your dog isn't raw fed, but has been playing or sniffing around or sniffing the poo of a dog that's raw fed, that has this incredibly high level of Salmonella, they can develop this bug.
I'm going to play devil's advocate here. So I've seen or heard quite a lot of people saying in the circles on all these Facebook groups and stuff, saying, my dog's been fed raw for X amount of years, absolutely fine, nothing wrong. Are certain dogs more or less tolerant to this bacteria? Or, I mean, I'm sure we'll go into any long-term implications in a bit, but, you know, from the bacteria, vomiting and diarrhea side of things, how does that affect some dogs and not others?
Yeah, really good question. I suppose it would be similar to humans. It's going to depend on our immunity and the dog's immunity, but also it's going to depend on the type of food that they are feeding, the type of raw that they are feeding. You've got to have a level of fiber in there, for example. You've got to nurture that gut bacteria, because 70% of our immunity sits in the gut. You've got to have the high levels of vitamin D3. You've got to have high omega-3s as well, which also supports the health of our immunity. So some dogs won't be getting that level, especially owners who are going it alone. But vomiting and diarrhea is just one of the problems. The next huge one that we see is obesity, because we've obviously got owners. I mean, dogs love raw food. Obviously, they love it. Dogs love eating. When I take Ruff for a walk, he'll eat fox poo and cat poo. So dogs are led by anything that absolutely stinks, and raw food stinks. So obviously they're going to love it, which makes an owner really happy. But at the same time, the owner has to put up with the stench in their kitchen. But can
I just mention that point as well? And I'm sorry, but I keep bringing it back to what I'm hearing in these dog circles. I've seen a lot of people saying, my dog loves it, I would never be so cruel as to take it away from them. But it's like, well, yeah, I suppose you love McDonald's too, but if you ate McDonald's all the time, I'm sure you wouldn't be ill. I'm sure you'd just be ill all the time.
Yeah, but equally, dogs do love all foods, really.
Yeah,
they're happy with whatever we give them.
Yeah.
Especially 90%, well, 80% of the breeds out there. Yes, you do get some that are highly selective and are very fussy, but 80% of dogs are thrilled with whatever we give them. So obviously, so just going back to the obesity problem, obesity problem leads on to cancers. It leads on to debilitating arthritis, and it's one of the worst conditions you can see in a dog. No, you know that it'll shorten their life expectancy enormously if a dog is overweight. So that's the number one. The second one, or the third thing that very high protein diet causes is it can cause severe problems with the kidneys. So it's a little bit like putting, as I say, because dogs are not carnivores and they do not need that level of protein, they are omnivores like us, you're actually damaging their kidneys irreparably. You can't repair kidneys once they're damaged. So it's a little bit like the Atkins diet that came out probably before you quite young, Holly, but I remember the Atkins diet was massive in the 90s, where people were just eating bacon and sausages and meat and high fat. And actually people were, and I have seen it myself. I had a beautiful St. Bernard, I remember, this was about 8 years ago, who the owner was feeding, decided to put their dog onto a raw meaty diet, and the dog developed severe kidney failure and died. So what you're doing is you're overloading the protein so much that and that's why you can't sustain, a human can't be sustained on an Atkins diet, for example, because it just damages your kidneys. You've got to get rid of the proteins in the kidneys, and you're overloading the kidneys. So we're getting kidney failure. But there's the other one that's the most painful condition of all that we see, and we see it so much around Christmas time as well, is pancreatitis, where owners are just feeding such high fat. And animal fat is what we call saturated fat. So any fat that's solid at room temperature is saturated fat. So the fat in animals is solid, and it can cause this problem in that their pancreas just stops working. It becomes hugely inflamed from the high fat, and it actually starts to leak out these digestive enzymes into the stomach area, into the abdominal area, and starts to digest the organs. So the pain that a dog comes in when they have pancreatitis, I can't tell you, it's the most excruciatingly painful condition. They come in walking as though they're on eggshells with their backs arched, they vomit, they have diarrhea, they have to be on a drip, and owners feel awful because the pain that you've put your dog through is just the worst thing. Then we've got the raw diets that are not properly balanced are really, really low in something called manganese, one of the and manganese is so important in the makeup of dogs' tendons and ligaments. And if a dog is lacking in manganese, they are far more prone to having a ruptured cruciate ligament, which is the ligament in the knee. When they jump on the sofa, they jump up to meet owners, they run for their ball, they jump and twist. And if they haven't got strong, healthy ligaments, they will snap those ligaments. You end up with a dog with severe arthritis when they're older, and you end up with huge veterinary bills because they just have one operation after another, and they go on to chronic medication because you've made the wrong choice and you diet that lacks the right nutrients for the dog.
An owner would never pair that, would they? They would never pair a tall element with what they were feeding, as in,
absolutely,
high protein raw diet. They would never. They would never connect that. Yeah. So that's fascinating.
And then we've got even another one. We've got something called Polyradiculoneuritis, and it's actually caused by feeding raw chicken. So chicken is a big one with raw feeders because you're supposed to vary apparently the type of food. Polyradiculoneuritis is an autoimmune condition, and it affects the nerves. So they actually go paralyzed in the back legs, and it can eventually affect the whole chest. They can actually become completely paralyzed. So we've got that as well. I mean, I could go on and on with it. Oh gosh, there is even another one, and you'll have to ask me another question, and I'll come back to it. But there is another really important one, and I've just forgotten it. But yes, there are so many conditions that we see that are harmful to our pets. They really are harmful to our pets, that cause these conditions.
I mean, have there actually been done any scientific studies on the benefits of raw feeding, or anything published, anything that people, because there must be something, Ariel, surely, for this to be such a huge growing trend. I read somewhere that raw feeding is just,
no,
I mean, it's not vets that I'm hearing it from, it's owners. Feed raw.
Yeah.
I feed raw.
Yeah.
Has there been any scientific published studies?
Yep. Absolutely none. I went into Google Scholar. To find if there have been published studies, because every type of novel protein or novel food has to have published science. We, as vets, we need evidence-based medicine. We need proof that this is safe, and we don't have this. I went into Google Scholar, and all that and I actually have access to material that the public can't read, because my daughter's at university, so she can access these published articles. There are no published articles that state that raw feeding is healthy and listing the benefits. There was one published article by from Iowa in America, and instead of saying trying to show the benefits of raw feeding, it just ran down the commercial food. So it was almost trying to balance out justifying why they were using it. All it comes up with is the dangers of raw feeding. When you Google, in Google Scholar, not just normal Google, but actual published papers. There was one paper published in 2018, and that actually went into one of the companion animal magazines. So not a sort of a medical article. And he was trying to justify how the benefits. And I read half the article, and I got halfway, and he called dogs carnivores, and I just thought, no, they are not carnivores. So I stopped reading, because I knew that the rest of what he was saying was completely untrue. He scientifically was completely incorrect.
Yeah.
So no, there have been no published papers, just the opposite. Published papers stating the dangers of raw feeding and And the same vet nutritionist who did the course that I did, the vet nutrition course, she's actually got a published paper talking about raw feeding as well. And she puts why owners choose it, but she lists all the dangers. And it's actually in that article that she lists about the pig's ears and the hooves that you buy as chews, of the rawhide chews. Rawhide chews have as much bacteria on them. They are as dangerous and can cause the vomiting as the raw meat.
Wow, I mean, I'm learning so much here. I genuinely thought, with so much money and backing behind it, that these companies would be able to find a scientist or two that would be able to publish a study claiming some benefits. But I'm actually astounded. So that shows that there really isn't any benefits, is there?
There aren't. And the reason why people who start companies like this, they have no interest in the health of the animal. They might cover themselves by saying, oh, it's balanced, it's got the right nutrients, it's FIDF, the Pet Food Manufacturing Association says that it's balanced. But they don't care for your pet at all. They're just looking at the bottom line. They're huge corporate companies.
So we've gone through, all these animals, pets, not safe for pets. But as an environmentalist, Ariel, I know that you're a keen environmentalist. What are the impacts of raw feeding on our environment?
Yeah, so that's the bit that saddens me the most. I'm going to feel quite emotional about this, but when 25% of all animals and feedlot animals and animals that are slaughtered and chickens, 25% is used for pet food. I know that the raw food market is a very small market compared to the meat-based commercial diet food, but certainly raw does fall into that category. But as soon as we put a value on, as I said before, as soon as we put a value on that 25%, it makes people want to kill more animals, because obviously they're making more money. You've got, besides the environmental, the cruelty issue of the animals being killed, you've actually got the amount of water that's needed to in that animal's lifetime. You've got the runoff of all its fecal matter that New Zealand has no more fresh streams anymore from the runoff of the industry of farming in New Zealand, for example, and that's from the industry. And then obviously you've just got the massive impact of rainforests being broken down so that you can have more livestock, you can plant more food to feed more livestock, because it requires an enormous amount of soya or corn or whatever food you're growing to feed the livestock. So that may be that chicken or cattle. So you need space for that, and that's destroying our rainforest, which is definitely damaging our biodiversity and having a huge impact. But as I mentioned before, I also think of everything to do with meat-based doesn't care about the environment. So every packaging that you're going to get will be plastic. You'll never find sustainable packaging with a raw food company, and that packaging will end up in our oceans. And then we haven't even mentioned fish. So fish is a huge part of raw feeding. Some owners only choose to feed fish as a raw. I remember one owner in the consulting room, she looked at me and she said, my dog only eats raw fish. And she looked at me, she said, but it absolutely stinks. And I thought, why do it? But it was her choice. She had made the decision. But what's happening is fish should never, ever be used in our pet food. A dog would never jump into the ocean to go and catch a tuna, or a cat would never, ever think of going into a lake or into the sea to catch their food. And fish is actually one of the top allergens in cats. If they had food intolerances, it's to fish. So when we talk about a species appropriate diet, fish actually is completely inappropriate to our pets. So we should never be plundering our oceans and taking, and the saddest thing as well is and it's going to be the small fish, and it'll come from cheap sources from Thailand, where they have these enormous nets, and they just bring in tons and tons of tiny fish that are there to feed the bigger fish. And actually they did a DNA test recently on fish food, and they found shark fin in there, and one of the shark genes in there, and one of the species of shark that's actually going extinct. So you're ending up with all form of sea life in our pet food, which exactly it's all scooped, all put together. But dogs that are on a raw food diet also badly need to have, because you've got such high amount of fat, but not the right fat, it's the omega-6 fat, and you have to balance that with omega-3s. And the only omega-3 that you can get, either you can get the plant-based source from algae, but obviously raw feeders don't think of that. They just get it from fish. And the worst one that they get it from, I've seen in the top raw food things, is they advertise using krill oil. Now, krill is a tiny little planktony, they're the little shrimp that the smaller fish need to eat. So not only are we killing our fish, but we're actually taking away the food from the ocean that's going to feed the fish and start the chain to nurture our oceans. We've got to look after our oceans, and that's going into pet food, and that to me is just environmentally, it's a disaster. You can't do that. So yes, so there we go. I get very
no, I mean, I think I know meat eaters and fish lovers who have seen certain documentaries and have started to think twice and limit and reduce. And I'm sure people watching today, even if they don't give up, but reduce and choose, and just if people just keep doing their research, that's what's needed, really, isn't
absolutely it? And when you're feeding a small dog, a very small dog, meat with every single meal, which a human wouldn't do that, a human wouldn't have meat with every single meal, you're giving them the same carbon footprint as if you were driving a very large SUV car, a Land Rover 4x4 over a year. That's how much emissions or the carbon footprint is the same for a very small dog. So that's just not fair. It's not fair, not fair on the dog, but not fair on our environment to make that choice.
Some people, I mean, some people, I can just hear them. I'm just playing devil's advocate. I can hear people say now, but I just get the offcuts from the butcher, or I just get the things that the butcher doesn't want. But I was speaking to someone just today, actually, and the butcher has not got any more of that because it's becoming so popular. Yeah. So now they're having to feed fish. And I was thinking exactly the same thing as what you were saying. So because the butcher doesn't have any more waste products, their dog now needs to eat fish.
Or they will buy a sirloin steak. So they will actually buy the human grade, which is terrible for our environment, because then you're not buying offcuts anymore. You're actually buying the bits that you're increasing, you're shooting the carbon footprint of your very small dog massively by then buying human grade meat. And some owners are so proud that they choose human grade meat, but environmentally a disaster.
Yeah, absolutely. So Ariel, what in your opinion as a vet and also a mother are your biggest concerns with raw feeding? And I suppose I'm going to ask, why did you make me choose today to do the live? Because I know we've had this booked in for quite a long time.
Okay, so I just want to take us all back 2 years today. 2 years today, we'd had the announcement on the 23rd of March that the whole country was going to go into lockdown. The whole of England was going to go into lockdown. And today, 2 years ago, we were shocked, weren't we? I mean, we didn't know what lay ahead. I still and I bet I speak for everyone else, I still don't sleep properly. I wake up so early in the morning. I can't go for long journeys on motorways anymore. I find I get panicky going to huge events with a lot of people. I find my heart rate racing. I never used to have, and I'm not alone. I think we're all the same. So the pandemic has changed our lives forever. It really has. It's changed how we think. And that leads me to the topic of zoonoses. So what zoonoses, and that's what coronavirus is, or that not was, but that is what coronavirus is. So coronavirus is a zoonosis. And a zoonosis is a disease that's transmitted between animals and humans. So we get the disease from animals, which is where we got coronavirus from. It was from humans eating bats, is what they said. It all started, they said, in the wet market in Wuhan is the source of coronavirus, where you've got dogs being sold in cages for the Chinese to eat alongside the live chicken that they'd be cutting and killing for the animals. To me, there is no difference in raw feeding your dog compared to a wet market. I wrote an article about that as well, because there's no difference. These dogs are sitting in crates ready to be sold for their meat. The owner is not the owner, the lady in her little stall, probably selling chicken to people. She's just going to chop the head off the chicken and feed it to the dogs, so that at least it's a bit like a feedlot at an abattoir waiting for the cattle to be killed. They have to be fed. It's exactly the same thing. It's feeding animals to animals. So the zoonoses leads me into this thing of zoonoses, and this is where I speak as a mother, as a vet, and as a dog lover. We have such an incredible bond with our dogs. They have, 90% of the dogs that I send dog food to have human names. I love the names of all the dogs, but 90% of them are human names, because we treat them as little humans in our home. They sleep in our beds. We organize our holidays for them.
They give us kisses.
They lick our faces, and we love that. We love them to slobber on our cushions, lick our faces. But if they're raw fed, they carry so many what we call zoonoses that can be transmitted to humans. So E. coli, which I mentioned, the diseases that dogs can get from raw feeding, but E. coli is one of the you get very high levels of E. coli, one of the bacteria in food, in raw food, and it's one of the biggest causes of UTIs, urinary tract infections, and pneumonia in humans. So elderly people are extremely prone to urinary tract, men and women. Young women are extremely prone to urinary tract infections, and you've got so many people at risk. You've got groomers who might be grooming, and young veterinary nurses who might be grooming a dog, and you obviously vets, we have to look in their mouths. You're fiddling with their saliva. Raw meat feeders also carry something called listeriosis, which is found in unpasteurized cheese. When you're pregnant, you must never eat unpasteurized cheese because it can cause abortions in humans. So raw feeding is actually such a risk to humans who may be pregnant. And there are so many young women who work with dogs in any capacity, and actually putting their babies' lives at risk if they are dog groomers, or if they're dog walkers, or they have a doggy daycare center and that dog licks them and they get this condition, listeriosis. Then there's Salmonella, which is, as I say, this latest outbreak that was found in the food. Salmonella in humans is extremely dangerous and can cause deaths. It's one of the very dangerous ones, but the most dangerous of all, and an article came out in April 2020 that was published that did make headlines, but then it's just forgotten about, and this terrified me the most, is that in raw food they found that it contained antibiotic resistant bacteria. And that is terrifying. That means that if your dog fell desperately ill, you couldn't even use the top gold line antibiotic to treat them. And even worse is they're passing that on to a human. So if that human was to get that E. coli resistant bacteria, antibiotic resistant E. coli and be affected with it. If you were to fall desperately ill, there's nothing that's going to help you, because antibiotic resistance is the biggest fear, and it's our biggest worry of our next pandemic. So when I have published that article on my website, it as I say, April 2020, it came out in the EU. They have these health talks, and that to me was one of the biggest worries. Is that actually raw feeding could become a huge risk because what we're doing is we're bringing bacteria into our homes, which should never be in there. All these bacteria, whether it's from the pig's ear or the raw food or the rabbit's ear. I mean, rabbit's ears are full of bacteria, for example. So yes, so that's my answer as a very concerned mother. I want a future for my children. I don't want another pandemic.
No, absolutely.
And so, yeah.
Absolutely. Oh, Ariel, thank you so much for all of this. I think there's just so much more to talk about as well. I think for each part of this live, we could probably do another live on each part. But I think it's really opened my eyes, because I always like to kind of be critical about these things as well, and try and think from another person's point of view and remember what people are saying. But it really is just not the way forward, is it?
No, in every capacity, and yet it's the most emotional decision that an owner makes, and they get completely embroiled in it, but overtaken by this incredible marketing that is out there, that's on the social media. And I haven't even gone down the route of bone impactions. I mean, that's another one, is dogs that break teeth and they get impacted intestines, where they have to have them surgically removed because they've been eating raw bones. And oh yes, that was the other one as well, is owners who feed duck necks and chicken necks. The chicken necks actually contain the thyroid gland, and dogs that are fed too much of this thyroid gland in the raw chicken necks, because it's normally damaged by cooking, but obviously being raw, they end up with hypothyroidism. So they end up completely hyperactive. And actually, I have had that in my consulting room. I remember having 2 German Shepherds and a Rottweiler. He was gorgeous. He was called Bear. They overtook. I mean, the consulting room was quite small. Now these 3 enormous dogs in my consulting room. They were all raw fed. And I remember her saying to me that the bit that worried her the most is that she couldn't leave them alone, because when she left them alone, they used to rip up the lino of her kitchen floor. And completely destroy the house. And these were dogs that their diet was so unbalanced. They needed a balance. They were so sort of hyped up. I mean, I'm not saying that they were the hypothyroid ones, but when you've got too much protein and you don't have carbohydrate, your body craves carbohydrate. Yeah. People on Atkins diets do describe that, where you actually crave carbohydrate. So you get so many behavioral issues with dogs that are on this extremely high meat diet as well. Wow. Sorry, I could go on and on with that
is another area I'd love to explore with you, is about food and nutrition and behavior in dogs as well. Oh, Dr. Ariel, thank you so much.